everyone, welcome back. Today on the channel we're going to talk about super long exposure using the 18 stop ND filter we talked about in the previous video. Usually you would use this for solar photography, but if you buy this and you take pictures of the sun once and you're like, I have no idea what else I'm supposed to do with this thing, this is an idea you can do with it, is several minute exposures. So for today we have the Z7 II here on the tripod. We have the kit lens 24-70 f4, and I have a cage on it for video that I usually do with it. I have the 95mm filter here with the stop down filter ring. It is a 72 to 95, so you can put a 95mm filter on this and then screw this onto your 72mm lens. So before you put it on, when you use your back screen on the camera, make sure your horizon's level, set up everything that you want it to be, all that, and then make sure you turn off your IBIS and VR. You don't want that on when you're doing a long exposure. You don't want to counterbalance anything and like blur your photo. Then you want to zoom in on the area you want to be in focus. Make sure it's in focus. And then when you have everything in focus and set the way you want it to be, turn your autofocus off. And then the main idea behind a long exposure with a dark filter is you can avoid having people in your shots. If people meander through, then they walk out in a couple minutes that it's doing the exposure, they won't be in the picture. Boats that go by won't be in the picture. Stuff like that. As long as it's perfectly stationary, it'll stay in the photo. One of the cool things about this is you get like a super flat look to the water, and if you have any good clouds, which today is just boring blue skies, I have other examples of good clouds in some photos. You want the big fat cumulonimbus clouds that have like a lot of blue space around them so that they really come in heavy in the photo. So make sure you also have noise reduction set to on in the camera for high ISO photos. So for me on the Nikon, it's under your photo shooting menu. It's just called long exposure noise reduction. Make sure it's on, and then you're good. Once you got everything framed up, everything's focused, you got your VR and everything turned off, you have your autofocus turned off. If you're on a DSLR, you want to cover the back optical viewfinder or light will leak in onto the sensor and give like a weird green kind of cast, whatever color's behind you, which is usually grass and trees, so it's going to light leak green onto the sensor just like it would on film. And some of the higher end DSLRs have a little iris that you can close on this, and it works fine for that. But on a mirrorless, you don't have to worry about that at all. It's digital, you don't have to worry about it. But if you're on a DSLR and you don't have a iris to close, you just do this with your hat, just cover it up, wait for the exposure to be done, take it back off. It's really not end of the world for that kind of stuff. So now we have everything set up on the camera. We're going to put the filter on and try not to touch anything on the camera. So since I've done this many times before, my starting area is around base ISO, which for me is 64. Most other people it's going to be ISO 100. So you can just leave your ISO there. Put your f-stop at f5. That way you have nice sharp all the way through. And it's kind of okay for landscapes. So you don't want to be shooting like f14 on this, because then you're going to be doing like a 15-minute exposure, which if you want to do that, have at it. It's fine. And also another note, on the Nikon, the new Gen 2 Nikon mirrorless bodies, you can set up to like, I don't know, it was like 10-minute exposure without a remote. But on most camera bodies, you're gonna need a remote so that you can set the exposure to 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Anything past 30 seconds, you're probably gonna need a remote for. But on the Gen 2 Nikons, you don't need that. So I'm just gonna set my exposure to 300 seconds. It's not really going to show anything on the screen. It's going to look like crap. So another tip you want to do, once you get everything dialed in, you want to put your self timer on. So that I have it set at 10 seconds. So I'm going to change it to 5 seconds. So now whenever I hit the shutter button, I will not rock the camera when I go to take the picture. So we're going to hit the shutter button with autofocus off. And it will take the photo right now. So right now the camera's doing the exposure, and I can see the seconds on the top LCD counting down. Let me try to get a video of that on my phone so I can show you guys. There we go, 261, 259, tells you the seconds remaining. Which is pretty cool. It doesn't do that on the DSLR, I can tell you that. So once the camera is done doing your first exposure, this is the normal exposure, the shutter is open, the sensor is on, it's reading everything over 5 minutes. Now once the countdown is complete, it's going to take a second frame with the shutter closed. It's going to take a black screen photo, just a black photo, and it's going to overlay it inside the camera, and it's going to reduce all the noise that was created by all the hot pixels during the long exposure. So it'll remove like 99% of the noise. Now, I have an example from a previous photo on a DSLR, the D500, when I did it without the noise reduction, and I'll put that in there and show you. Like, it looks awful. Like, I don't know how to explain it, so you'll see. Now, whenever you do these long exposures, make sure you do a second black dark shot using your noise reduction. That way when it comes out, it'll look pristine. Now hopefully, with the first shot in this is going to be good, because if you're doing a 5-minute exposure, the whole photo is going to take 10 minutes minimum. So in an hour, you're going to be lucky to nail down 6 shots. So it's best to try and get it as accurate as you can the first shot or two, so you can move on to what you want to do next, not take all day to get 1 or 2 good photos. And then of course the long exposure, as I said, it gets rid of all the boat traffic, gets rid of the kayaks, people hiking by, like none of that shows up, no cars, nothing. It's the same technique people use to get a picture of like Times Square completely empty and void of people. So if you see a picture of Times Square and they're like, oh no, it's closed down, no one here. No, they just did like a 10-minute exposure and the people walking by just didn't show up in the photo. So we got another 1.5 minutes left of this, so just got time lapse through this for the rest of the video. And hopefully I have something decent to show you here at the end. So we're getting ready down to the last second of the exposure. Now it's going to do noise reduction, and it says on the top window LCD screen job NR. So now it's doing a closed shutter blank shot to overlay and get rid of your noise. And that's going to take the same amount of time that your exposure is. So 5 minutes later, we'll see what we got. And I'd like to add that while the camera's doing a job noise reduction with the blank photo, you can pick the camera up, move it around, do what you want to do, get ready for your next shot, readjust your composure and everything. And I mean, you can't look through the viewfinder to do that like you can on a DSLR, so it's kind of a negative for the mirrorless, because on a DSLR you can pick this up, look through the EVF, recompose for your next long exposure shot. On this, you can't do that because the EVF is dark while it's doing the exposure. EVF is fed off the CMOS sensor on the inside, so it doesn't really work that great. And I just want to add that when you're doing a very long exposure like this, it's absolutely paramount that you have a very solid tripod and a solid tripod head and a solid mounting solution, because any vibration of you walking around on the ground, any wind hitting it, you moving around, you accidentally bumping and touching it, it will blur your photo real bad, real quick, if you don't have a very solid tripod or a solid base to at least put it on. So this is definitely something you just can't do holding the camera. You can't really do on like an El Cheapo tripod like what my GoPro's on right now that I'm shooting with. You really need some beefy stuff for it. Okay, so we got the final image here. It looks really dark, but everything looks like it's in decent focus. And another thing I need to mention is the any leaves, trees, brush in the background you have in your long exposure is going to move around in the wind. even on a calm day like this, a little bit of breeze from coming from the moving water is gonna make your leaves swirl and be a little messy. So if you keep the trees and stuff in the further distance, don't let it show up in your image, you'll be a lot better off. So if you have leaves like right here in front of the camera, it's not gonna work as well. It's gonna look just out of focus when in reality it's just the leaves moving. Okay, so that didn't work out too good. It's a little dark. I do have faith in the camera's dynamic range to bring back some of it. So, just for fun, we're gonna do another shot real quick. Well, not real quick, it's gonna take 10 minutes. A couple seconds for you guys watching, 10 minutes for me. So that 16-minute exposure is complete with the black shot on top of it for noise reduction. It's a little bit brighter, it's not terrible. I could probably bring the blacks up and make it look decent. Everything looks sharp on the back screen. Highlights aren't too terrible in the waterfall in the back. Another thing you could do with these exposures, if you don't like one exposure is too dark and your last exposure is too bright, you could always make them into an HDR in Lightroom, and then you could have more dynamic range in your image. So something you can think about also. And this isn't like the most entertaining photo ever from what I can tell. Maybe it'll be better when I get home and edit it together and put the video together, so we'll check that out. Hopefully it's good. And of course my GoPro died as I was putting this together at the very end, so I'm not gonna really worry about switching out the battery. So real quick, we'll put the end results on here that are nice and edited, give you a good shot at them, see what they look like in an HDR together. And if this was helpful for you and you stuck through the whole video, I really appreciate that. You guys are the best. And please give me a like, subscribe, give me a comment down below. Tell me if you've ever tried this before, what your experience was, if you prefer the long exposure or do you prefer stacking several short exposures to get the same look. And if these turn out good, I can put them on my website. I sell prints on there, manswoodlandperspective.com. Link in the description, of course. Link in the description for the shirts that I'm wearing for MWP. Hopefully this gives you the itch to go outside, do some hiking, see the world, get some shots on your camera. If you have any questions, shoot me a line. Love to help you out.